In Washington state, protesters are trying to get rent control legalized. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of the state of Washington. And as you know, Washington is one of the more progressive states in the country, okay? And one of the least landlord-friendly states as well. So, of course, what they're trying to do is push for rent control. And I've gone over this in many different cases, including the rent control that they're trying to pass up in St. Paul right now in Minnesota. And I am not a fan of rent control. I think that government controls of markets have really hurt real estate. They've made housing costs more expensive, and they've caused just huge problems for the tenants that they just can't see. But before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button. Maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think of rent control, okay? Let me know if you think it's a good idea or a bad idea. Obviously, as a landlord, you know, some of you probably work with rent-controlled units and you're still able to make a profit, but a lot of us, you know, we just don't even want to deal with it. So this article comes from comonews.com, and it says, protesters call for state rent control law to be scrapped, citing low wages, rising rents. Protesters gathered Saturday in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood to call attention to the need for rent control in the city, as demonstrators said that low wages and skyrocketing rent costs are threatening to leave many people homeless. Dozens of people gathered in the area to demand that the law that makes rent control illegal in Washington state to be overturned. Currently, landlords can increase the monthly rent as high as they'd like, provided they give their tenants a 60-day notice period. So apparently Washington state is one of many states throughout the country that has a law in place that makes rent control illegal. And wisely, a long time ago, in many cases, a lot of states put these laws into place because they saw the devastating effects of rent control, okay? In places like New York, they saw that when rent control is put into place, builders, they stop building buildings because they can't make a profit off of them, okay? A lot of landlords, you know, they do horrible, you know, they can't maintain their buildings. They can't keep up with the property tax payments. They can't do hardly anything with these buildings. And so a lot of the buildings become dilapidated and they become, you know, just horrible looking. Not only that, but tenants who don't even need a rent-controlled unit somehow end up staying there. So you'll end up with a situation like in New York where you have a tenant who makes, you know, $500,000 a year living in a rent-controlled unit. Meanwhile, you'll have a family of 4 who makes 50 grand a year and they can't find a rent-controlled unit because they're all being clogged up by a bunch of wealthy people. And I mean, that really does happen in New York. So, I mean, there's a lot of issues with rent control and a lot of reasons why it just doesn't work for landlords. It doesn't help the market, and it ends up hurting tenants in the long run. I live in a tiny one-bedroom apartment with my boyfriend, said Danielle Zarachowski. Zarachowicz. Sorry, I'm bad with names. One of the participants in the Saturday rally. We pay $1,600 in Fremont. I've been pushed out of my apartment before for rising rent, said Jessica Scalzo. I live in a studio apartment in the Central District and I pay $1,568 a month. Excuse me. And I would not be able to afford that if I wasn't splitting it with my partner who I live with. And that's why dozens of people braved the rain Saturday to rally for changes. And here's the problem though, okay? Rent control won't necessarily make it so that housing is more affordable. It might actually make it so it is harder for these people to find housing. So they're saying that, you know, they pay a lot of money. This one person pays $1,600 for somewhere in Fremont. I don't know where Fremont is, if that's a nice area or not, right? But imagine you're in a place filled with rent-controlled apartments. You go out to look for an apartment to rent and you can't find one. So you have to either go out to an area further out where you don't want to live, or you have to sublease an apartment from someone else who has a rent controlled apartment, and then you're going to end up paying more than the rent controlled amount. And that's exactly what happens a lot of the times, especially in places like New York where there's a lot of rent control. Okay, the tenants will literally sublease an apartment to you, so they will be renting the apartment for, let's say, $1,000 a month, and they will charge you $2,000 a month to live there. So you're not actually saving money in that sort of case. The other thing is, you know, all the newer buildings in New York, they don't fall under rent control, right? So because there are very few rent controlled apartments available, and it will take you forever to get one, if you're new to the city and you're moving in, you have to go to one of these newer buildings that is not under rent control, and you have to pay sky high prices that are super high because those are the only units that are available. So, I mean, it does not work out well for the tenants. Now, for the landlords, obviously, it's a bad deal too. So, I mean, rent control does not work. And, you know, any economist could tell you this. And it's too bad that the tenants are unwilling or unable to understand the simple facts of supply and demand. And that's why dozens of people braved the rain Saturday to rally for changes. Rent control is frankly what we should have had 40 years ago, said Alvin Muragori, a community organizer who works with Seattle City Councilwoman Kashama Sawant's office. The ban should never have been put in place. Sawant is pushing for changes, and her office has collected 15,000 signatures in an effort to overturn the ban on rent control in Washington state. State lawmakers need to change the law before the issue of rent control can move forward. Well, thinking that it should have been put in place 40 years ago is kind of not that bright, okay? You know, Seattle's a nice place, but it didn't really get super expensive until the big tech boom, okay? Seattle used to be a very affordable place here in the U.S., and everyone, you know, who is a little bit older actually knows that, okay? But then the tech boom started going off, and all these big tech companies, I mean, they came up and they made Seattle a much, much more popular place to live. And now it's just a lot more expensive because a lot of people want to live there. That's not a bad thing. Okay, that happens to all major cities. The more popular they become more expensive. Now, trying to put rent control in there, you know, you're socialize. What it is it's like socialized housing. Okay, and the problem with socialized housing is it takes away your ability to choose on your own where you want to live and how you want to live. And rent control really does that because it takes away people's ability to live in the areas they want to live. It takes away the developer's ability to develop properties and make them profitable. So the supply actually shrinks because of it. It's ridiculous when I drive around the city and I see more and more people that can't have shelter, Zara Chowicks said. Many people worry that when Governor Jay Inslee's eviction moratorium ends on September 30th, conditions for many renters will turn dire. It is important that working people are protected from a coming wave of evictions, Muragori said. Well, eviction moratorium aside, right? The issue of rent control, bad idea. You know, obviously the eviction moratorium is a bad idea as well, but you know, all of these things put in combination, they really, really hurt both landlords and tenants, okay? And that's the main thing that a lot of people just need to focus on. They get it in their head. They have good intentions. They want, we want lower cost housing. We don't want to see people getting evicted. We want, you know, people just to be doing better, but then they put these things into place that actually have the opposite effect. And they don't see that it will have the opposite effect, that housing prices are actually going to rise because of the eviction moratorium. More people are going to end up homeless because of the eviction moratorium. More people would end up being unable to afford to live in the area because of rent control. And more people are going to end up homeless because of rent control. See, and it just doesn't make much sense I just wish that these people would really think these things out before they try to put ridiculous laws in place like this. And, so far, right now, they haven't scrapped the state rent control law just yet. I don't know how much support it's going to have throughout the entire state. I know in places like Seattle, it would probably pass, but I'm not sure, what people in the rest of the state would think of scrapping these rent control laws. So hopefully it doesn't pass, and I hope that, landlords there can continue to raise rents as they need.